the Great Plague. Yoko speaks at length about this event in Vampire Castle during the final chapter of Bravely Second, and there is much to tell. This is the event that would eventually result in the creation of the Glanz Empire through a long, winding path of guilt and sin. Yoko is a yokai, a demon, who states that she has existed on Luxendark for 4.6 billion years. In the distant past, she lived amongst normal people with no problem, and even had friends that she cherished. One day, she came across two travelers who had come to Luxendark on a glimmering ship from another world, heavily implying that these travelers were celestial beings. The song that plays while Yoko recalls this moment is that of Altair and Vega's theme, further emphasizing that theory. Yoko took quite a liking to the two strangers, and began to show them around Luxendark, and helping them adapt to this world, as they tried to find a way to return to their own. And then, the unthinkable occurred. Within the traveler's ship, inside their laboratory, a rare disease from the celestial realm came into contact with an illness originating from Luxendark, resulting in the creation of the exponentially multiplying ORIGINPLAGUE. There was no time to waste. If the plague was not contained immediately, it would wipe out all life on Luxendark. Everyone Yoko knew and loved would die. As she is a yokai, having an infinite lifespan and was unaffected by it, Yoko took the seeds of the ORIGINPLAGUE within herself. She then asked the two travelers to seal her away in a cave to keep the disease from spreading. The travelers fulfilled her request, and so Yoko slept for 1,000 eons. Over time, people began to believe that a god rested within the cave. So they built a shrine at the front of the cave and left treasures at its base as offerings to their sleeping god. The civilization that worshipped Yoko rose and fell, and knowledge of the yokai fell with them. Flash forward 24 centuries before the events of Bravely Second. A ship landed on the region where Yoko, still holding the ORIGINPLAGUE within her, continued to hide. A man entered the cave, Founder Geniolja, the originator of the Geniolja house, and the first ambitious man. He found Yoko, the first contact with a human she'd ever had in such a long, long time. After hearing her story, Founder regrettably informed Yoko that neither he nor the world had the medicine yet that could kill a plague of that magnitude. However, with tears in his eyes, he promised that someday, one of his bloodline will find a cure for the plague, and return for her. A spark of hope flickered within Yoko. A foreseeable future, where she'd be free of this curse, was just on the horizon. Jump to a point 20 years before Yu's adventure began. The second ambitious man, Greed Geniolja, Yu's father, arrived on the same shore as his predecessor. He approached Yoko and claimed himself to be her savior. His plan was to take Yoko back to Gathlashio, where he would cure her of the plague with the tools there. So he moved her soul into the body of a young girl that had come on the voyage. On top of this, Greed collected some of the treasures and the shrine itself that was at the front of the cave to fill the church's coffers. But, as was to be expected, his plan was a grave mistake. The girl took ill shortly after, and they were forced to dock in the nearest port. Greed had been the only one to know that it was the ORIGINPLAGUE that was making the girl sick. Her grandfather begged for Greed to put the voyage on hold and to keep her in quarantine until further notice, but Greed pushed for them to return to Gathlashio. A message was sent to the church, or as it was better known, the Crystal Orthodoxy, asking for advice on what course of action they should take. The Orthodoxy responded with Geist Grace, an exorcist. Leaving his son behind, Geist traveled to where the girl was being kept to exorcise her of any demons that lurked within. But one look, and Geist knew that it was no demon causing the girl's state of fever. Some wished to use the ritual as an excuse to bind time for quarantine, but others prompted to go through and get the ritual over with, believing it would cure her so they could begin the journey home. While the girl's grandfather, a compassionate man, and a merciful man wanted to keep the girl from moving to prevent any spreading of the plague, and thought the exorcism would delay their departure, Greed and a covetous man were impatient and wanted to hurry home. Regardless, Geist reported the girl's condition to the Office of Public Health, who ordered her barred from travel and into quarantine. Unfortunately, this would not dissuade those who wished to go home. The covetous man, a figure within the church, approached the merciful man, claiming that the church's medicines could cure the girl. Meanwhile, Greed appealed to the compassionate man, the girl's grandfather, urging him that she deserved the finest care of the church. Both fell to these poisoned words, and so a fateful decision was made. The ambitious man, Greed, who knew the truth, the compassionate man, who wanted nothing more than for his granddaughter to be well, the covetous man, who desired to bring a bounty of wealth home to the Orthodoxy, and the merciful man, who caved and allowed for a dying girl to return home. These four ordered for the ships to depart. The voyage home included multiple stops at ports along the way, and each one was another seed planted. It was only once they'd reached their third continent that word had caught up to them. The first port they had docked at was under the midst of a terrible plague. In an instant, Greed realized his fault, his sin against all of humanity. In an attempt for redemption, he tried to undo what he could. He gave every sailor in his fleet a flagon of rum, poisoned rum. After that, he sunk his entire fleet, his ships, his men, the treasure, the girl that Yoko still remained in. He sent them all to the bottom of the sea, hoping that this would stop the spread. But nonetheless, Greed could not undo what was to come. He returned to Gathlashio with a small sum of treasure, and was cemented in a place of higher standing in the Crystal Orthodoxy. It's entirely possible that the Orthodoxy had ordered Greed to abandon everything to simply spare Eternia, an action not surprising to those who knew the true nature of the Orthodoxy. But this is unknown. Geist returned home with his own fleet, but only to find despair awaiting him. His son had become ill while he was away and died. Grieving for failing to protect him from the plague, Geist blamed himself for not stopping the other men, believing that he was the one responsible for this sin. 1 year later, around the time that Denny Geniolja was born, the plague finally reached Eternia. After having struck countless other towns and ports, the Origin Plague attacked a small village in the outskirts of the Eternian Mountains, the town now known as Gravemark Village, the former home of Brave Lee. Cries of anguish and pain echoed through the mountains, until there was only silence. At this time, Brave was a young priest, and supported Geist's concerns about the plague. He sought out his elders, petitioning that they attempt to use the power of the crystals to heal the ill, but was denied by the Orthodoxy. Instead, they sealed off the high roads and cut off contact with border villages, including his place of birth, leaving them all to die. Angered greatly, Brave left the priesthood and turned away from the church. However, he still kept to his duty. Before leaving, Brave did two things. The first was to give his friend Norzin from the Office of Medicine complete authorization to conduct an investigation into the origin of the plague. The second was to plant Confederates into key positions of power in the Orthodoxy, allowing him to monitor the inner workings of the church through these followers. Sometime later, the strength of the plague began to fade away, but not because some cure had been found. Rather, it had simply run out of people to kill. But this peace would not last forever, as the second pandemic approached. The plague had mutated and developed a new strain, one that would certainly finish off those who remained, and it would soon be upon them. Norzen and his researchers worked tirelessly, fighting against the deadliest disease Luxembourg had ever known. Many died for the cause. Unwilling to risk the lives of any more researchers, he tested experimental vaccines upon himself, eventually resulting in the loss of one of his senses. And then, just before she died from her work, one researcher made a discovery. Felines had an immunity to the disease. She extracted their antibodies and transferred them into her daughter, with whom the remaining researchers tested until a working cure was found. The doomsday clock had been stopped, but at the cost of Minette's mental state scarred from her mother's negligence and abuse, and the sins of the tests forced on her. This was far from the end of the tragedies, though. While the cure was being developed, the world was revolting against the Orthodoxy for their crimes during the first pandemic. They had failed to listen to Geist's pleas and let greed bring the plague straight to them, and they had abandoned their people to save themselves. In a final act of glory, the heads of the Orthodoxy attempted to enact the Grand Ritual by overloading the Earth Crystal. At this time, Brave had been allied with Sage Juliana and Lester de Rosso in an attempt to capture all 4 crystals at once. But when word reached his ears about the Grand Ritual, he set off against his recruiter's words. His legions stormed the Earth Temple, and in the process, the Earth Vestal was slaughtered. The Grand Ritual had been interrupted, but the Earth Crystal had been cracked and was leaking power. Brave took this opportunity to begin using its power to treat the ill, as can still be seen today in Eternia's medical ward, thanks to the work and study of Vincent S. Court. This was the day that the Templar took Eternia. With their power to govern usurped, the focus was turned to the Church's military power, the Crystal Guard. The group was disbanded, ordered by Greed Geniolja, one of the high houses of the 3 Cavaliers. However, this too was out of self-interest. Greed sought to protect those he cared about by abandoning everyone else, much like the Orthodoxy. Of the disbander faction, houses Geniolja and Camlin attacked those who tried to keep the Crystal Guard together. This side was led by 2 large houses, under which a known swordsman named Jerome Balestra fought for. Balestra fought back against Geniolja and Camlin, spilling the blood of countless foes, but in the end he fell. The disbanders marched on. Gates were smashed, fires were set, manors burned to the ground. As he lay dying, Balestra entrusted the life of his son to his most loyal squire, Angard. Jan Balestra was raised by Mr. Angard, and eventually took to his name, waiting for the day to stab the Crystal Guard in the back for taking his father away, adding yet another sin to the Orthodoxy's long list. On the other side, Nikolai Nikolanikov had been tasked with actually a part of this attack on the now fragmented Crystal Guard. Realizing how terrible their actions were, Nikolai felt nothing but regret as he gazed into the hellfire before him. Later on, he would petition for the renewal of the Crystal Guard, and would recruit Jan to join him in seeking atonement for the horrors of that night. But it did not end there. The disbanding of the Crystal Guard had some unexpected effects in various regions of Eternia. No longer soldiers to the Crystal Guard, many took to banditry, pillaging the outer villages that had survived the plague. Houses Geniolja and Camlin formed private armies to deal with these bandits, and over time eliminated them all, destroying anything that opposed them to restore the illusion of peace. In one village, the banner of the lion was held high as members of House Genealja cheered, watching the village burn to the ground. "The witch has brought the plague, but we have burned her village to the ground." These words were the last to fill Bella's ears as she fell unconscious, her parents and sister already slain. She attempted to bring Donna back from death, using every spell and rite she could, no matter how forbidden, but to no avail. Every attempt only ended in spawning monsters, except one, Cuchulainn, in which she brought a statue to life that had been brought back by an explorer from an ancient civilization, wiped out by a plague. Whether Cuchulainn was the statue in front of Yoko's cave is unknown. In the end, the Crystal Guard was reformed, and peace was believed to have been returned. But this was a result of burning all that contradicted that illusion, and burying everything else under the rug. The dead were mourned, the survivors rebuilt. Greed Genealja, ironically, would die to a common illness. The Orthodoxy would continue to lose power. As for Denny, he believed it was the fault of House Genealja that the Orthodoxy had become so twisted, causing him and his father to no longer see eye to eye. When Greed decided that you would become the next head of the house due to Denny not being fully of Genealja blood, Denny was outraged. His father then made him an offer. If Denny could find the Sword of the Brave and bring it to him, he would reconsider his decision. Yu overheard this offer and decided to find the sword for his brother. Once he learned its location, Yu made his way to Geyser Grotto to retrieve it. Denny followed in an attempt to stop him, but it was too late. The pact was made, and the cost was Denny's right arm, a narrative reflected by Yoko to mentally distress Yu later in the future. Upon returning, Denny was disowned by his father, and after visiting his mother's tomb, he wandered off into the world. Along the way, he met similarly pained souls, Bella and Cuchulainn, Geist and Revenant and Minette, Jan and Nikolai. The group grew as they recruited more and more people who saw the world for what it really was, and about this time, the fight between Ouroboros and the Warriors of Light was coming to a close. Anne appeared before Denny and told him of a tool he can use to undo all the sin his great house had brought into the world, the space-time compass. The group had a goal. Denny Genealja was no more. He donned the mask of Kaiser Oblivion, and the Glanz Empire was born, with one single desire burning in their hearts: to travel back through time, kill Founder Genealja, and stop House Genealja from ever being formed, preventing the Great Plague from ever happening, saving the Orthodoxy from corruption, and ending the pain of the world. In his eyes, he would be a hero, and perhaps in some regards that is true. But this wish is a sin unto itself, a sin for Denny, for he is too far trapped in the past to accept it and build a better future.